Welcome to Season 2 of the NAPABA Coffee House, brought to you by the generous support from our sponsors. I'm Priya Purandare, and I'm the Executive Director of NAPABA. This season, NAPABA Coffee House conversations focus on how AANHPI leaders, especially women, have reached positions of prominence across various industries. This season is hosted by legal legend and trailblazer Deborah Wong Yang. Today, she continues the discussion with Janet Yang, the president of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. You may know them as the folks who hand out the Oscars. Janet is the first Asian American to lead the prestigious academy and only the fourth woman and second person of color to do so. It is so incredible to feature Janet's path to leading an organization of 10,500 film industry artists and leaders. It is fascinating how Janet got involved in the movie business in the 1980s when she was tasked with simultaneously opening up China to Hollywood and bringing Chinese cinema to the United States. Deb and Janet not only talk about career trajectories, but they spend some time discussing a film I personally love, The Joy Luck Club. We're not just speaking about AANHPI lawyers and talking about the law, but other ways AANHPI leaders are advancing visibility across all walks of society. So get that Java out and stay tuned for another captivating look at how AANHPI leaders continue to carve out pathways for our community. Cheers.
Janet Yang, welcome today. It's so wonderful to have you with us. I'm excited to have you because you're a dear friend, but also because you're somebody that everybody knows and who's been out there in the world doing amazing things. We have tons to talk about today. We want to talk about things that you've accomplished and the differences that you've made in your field. And before I get to the pinnacle of being the president of the Academy and your amazing career in filmmaking, I kind of want to start at the beginning to just give our listeners some sense of who you are and how you sort of got into it, because you were really one of the early folks who started to change things up in Hollywood. But what was your background and what inspired you to actually pursue a career in Hollywood? Because that wasn't the norm back then.
It was not the norm back then, and it was certainly not something I imagined I could be doing when I was growing up, which I did in a town on Long Island, a Jewish community. We were the only Asian family. New York seemed, eons away from California at the time. Went to school on the East Coast. None of it really intersected with Hollywood in any way, except for the fact that after college, I went to live in China. I had visited during my high school years when Nixon and Kissinger suddenly opened it up. My parents are from China. They intended to just get graduate degrees here and then move back to China. Then everything changed. They decided to settle here. My mother worked at the United Nations. We would take home leave every other year, but that was just to Hong Kong and Taiwan because that was what was recognized as China. And so suddenly in 1972, unexpectedly, because my parents at that time had never imagined they could also visit China again. It was so closed off. It was so distant. But suddenly we were able to go. And that one trip, that 1 3-week trip where I met tons of my relatives really did spark something in me, mostly just intense curiosity about my parents' background. It was a kind of sliding doors moment because my parents kept thinking about moving back to China. So I could have been raised in China. I would have been a Red Guard probably. And it was that generation. And I just couldn't stop thinking about, whoa, this is, and meeting my first cousins and aunts and uncles for the first time in my life, not having met any of them, just kind of blew my mind, and I thought, I just need to know more. I was also fascinated by the country being in every way so different from the one I grew up in. It was, obviously I felt the ancientness of it, its history. I felt how different. It was very poor at the time. And I just couldn't, and and they're very communist. It was the middle of the Cultural Revolution, but I found it all fascinating in every way. So I went to live there. I studied Chinese studies in college. I went to live there after college. Now we're in the early 80s. And I found myself really drawn to Asia, the people that I met there that were writers and artists and musicians and filmmakers. And I never had the opportunity to talk to people like that who look like me. They just didn't exist in my orbit for some reason. There were very few, I think, from our community who aspired to that at the time, or so it seemed. And I found myself so drawn to this circle of people. And then particularly at watching films and television shows with people who looked like me, which I never, ever saw growing up, and didn't know what I was missing until I saw it. So how I perceived people of our race changed. And I thought, well, if I had all these unconscious biases, as we like to say now, though that vocabulary didn't exist at the time, other people probably do. So all I could think when I left that 1.5 year experience was, I want to show these films to non-Chinese. I thought they were very beautiful, very interesting. And I really admired the filmmakers who made them. And I wanted to kind of open up people's eyes to the fact that there was cinema in China. I had always loved films. Again, never thought I could work in the film industry. So I came back and I was getting my business degree at Columbia because I didn't know what else to do that felt, appropriate, because that time in China did not lead to any career moves at the time. And I started having these film festivals or film screenings, like privately, just through friends and networks. And then there was, when I used to go to the Chinese consulate on 12th Avenue and 42nd Street, carrying these heavy 35 millimeter prints to whatever screening room, I would bump into other people who were interested in borrowing the same. And then I met some people who were working for a company in San Francisco, and they wanted to expand. They wanted to become a distributor of Chinese cinema. They had a theater they were refurbishing. It is the World Theater, which is in San Francisco on Broadway in Stockton, now China Live, a big building. And after graduating from business school, I was hired to run that company, which was the first real job I had and the only job I was interested in and felt qualified for. So then I had the official role of flying back and forth to China, choosing Chinese films, taking filmmakers and delegations to international film festivals, met so many wonderful people then, people who became giants in the industry like Tom Luddy, RIP, Jeff Gilmore, Richard Pena. They were all interested in Chinese cinema. So I was happy as a clam because I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. And then I got a call from someone at Universal Studios who heard what I was doing, and he wanted to open up the China market for American films. So I then found myself moving to Los Angeles, working at Universal Studios and representing several of the studios, again, flying back and forth to China, going through the libraries of Universal, Paramount, MGM, UA, and picking films to take to China for distribution, including taking Gregory Peck and a retrospective of his works. And then while I'm doing that, I get a call, and I promise this will be over soon, but it's so important to know how I got in this. It all happened in quick succession. Then I got a call from Kathy Kennedy's office. She was the Steven Spielberg's producer, and she said, Steven wants to make a film in China. We heard you're like the only person, and I was, who was flying back and forth to China, working, on behalf of the studios, and one thing led to another, and I was suddenly immersed in a production of Steven's Empire of the Sun. So this all happened in the early mid into the late 80s. So it just, and then after that, which was a wonderful experience. And it was a time where US China were friendly, and Bertolucci was making The Last Emperor in Beijing. They asked me to be a production executive. So I did that for a while. And then in 1989, I joined Oliver Stone to form a company with him. And then I started producing on my own. So that in a nutshell is how I got into this. It all happened with zero planning on my part, zero knowledge of where anything was going to lead. I literally had no idea what I was going to be when I grew up. But then once I was on a movie set, once I got sparked first by the passion for using cinema as a perceptual, tool, and understanding how deeply emotional the experience can be and how it opens up your mind and heart to different things. And then once I was on a movie set, like then I learned on the job what I wanted to do. It didn't occur to me. It just never felt like it was in the realm of possibility for me growing up on Long Island to say, yeah, I want to be a film producer or whatever, be the president of the Academy. It just couldn't even, be remotely on my radar.
Janet, one of the things is that, back in the 80s, and you would know better than anybody, the world of cinema was very different in China than it is today. And it wasn't really at the same place, as I understand it, as where sort of American cinematography was. So it's not as if it was like a equal to equal. It's they were very different. So the fact that you were sort of going into this, this world in China and coming back into this world of, of US cinematography, there's a marrying and a mixing that has some faith and confidence coming from you, because I think others might be deterred sometimes because that's not an easy path of trying to put that together. What was going on with you?
It was, it was, I guess I've always had just a lot of curiosity. So one of the things that we did when I was hired by the studio consortium, Universal Paramount MGM, we did like a massive I first went with the person who hired me, and then they sent me out on my own. But we explored how movies were shown in China, and often in the countryside. Like the Chinese Film Bureau was trying to prove to us this isn't a money-making proposition for us. So we went to the countryside and we saw lots of people, living in the countryside, who would bring a brick to sit in a field and watch a movie hanging on a sheet from both sides. And they might pay with an egg. So, and then when I lived in Beijing in the early 80s, I was working at a work unit, about once a week or once every 2 weeks, they would say, hey, guess what, everyone, we're going to the movies. And they would just give out tickets. So it really was part of the quote unquote propaganda machine, or the publicity machine, or whatever you want to call it, because now they use both words. So it was, in other words, just something that everybody did as part of their education in a way. It was like, let's go see a movie and let's talk about it. And I appreciated that, because it was, you can, whatever you might have thought of the movies, it was a shared experience. And I think that in the end is what everybody relishes about theatrical movie going, which is such a big topic right now right here and in all over the world, actually, but particularly here in Hollywood, is that theatrical experience of going together. And I remember, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it there and then and here and now as much as ever. And, love the idea that people are rediscovering that through Barbenheimer or whatever. But back then it was, it was just, wow. It was really thinking about film as entertainment, but also as a community gathering thing, as a way to change people's perceptions, as a way to influence people. And I think it would be naive for us to say that those aspects are, not infused in every film. Like whatever you put out there, what you say, what you don't say, how you represent people, characters, what kind of story you're telling, how you edit, how you shoot, all of it is deeply influential on our psyche and our emotional lives and on our perceptions of others. And so that's what's kept me going, frankly, is that if it were just pure entertainment and people left without being changed, I'm not sure I would be as interested. I think people often do leave changed.
Okay, let me fast forward, because as everybody knows, you're now the president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I think you're only the second person of color and the fourth woman to hold this position. But, it's a huge position. And in Los Angeles and in the US, it's really a huge position, which is fantastic. But what are some of the things that you hope to accomplish in this role now, because it's an amazing opportunity, and also one with a lot of responsibility too. Aside from all the
challenges.
things you have to do.
Yeah, I really relish a lot of, what I'm able to do as the president, just as a way to kind of set a tone. I feel like our industry is clearly at an inflection point. And I like to remind people that we are so damn lucky to do what we do. And I think most people feel this most of the time. Right now, things are very troubled, and there are, a lot of conflicts and resentment, and the industry has definitely changed quite a bit in recent years. And I hope to God that we're all able to come to the table. I personally, and the Academy in general, cannot get engaged in any labor disputes. It would go against our charter and bylaws. But I'm really hoping that people will find a way that, and I have to remain incredibly neutral about the specifics of the strikes. But beyond that, there really are big issues. I think in the past it was just about money. They could maybe compromise, but now there's bigger issues on the table, AI and just the data-driven companies and how artists can share. So I'm not making an opinion or a judgment. I'm just saying those are the issues on the table, which anybody who's reading the news would know. And I like to think that the Academy is a way to remind people that we work together. I mean, I'm very proud that our branch, we have 18 branches now, and almost all of them are behind the camera. We obviously have directors, writers, and actors. In fact, we only have one branch that's in front of the camera, actors. Everybody else is behind the camera and doing the hard work. And so the overwhelming majority of our membership are people who are toiling without the big credits. They're getting, directors get more glory, and writers may some producers a little bit, but then there's a host of other wonderful craftspeople who we all work together. And the communal nature and the collaborative nature of what we do, I think, is a great model for how the world should work. I used to play in an orchestra, and it reminds me a little bit of that same thing. It's not about any individual instrument. It's like how people come together to create a greater whole. And I guess I'm just that idealistic enough to think that this is a model, and everybody has to be treated fairly and with respect. And, and we really relish this collaboration, and we know that we can't do anything alone.
Yeah. I loved your analogy to an orchestra. I think it's apt in so many different kinds of situations, actually. My daughter was a viola player, and you don't get to carry them.
I have big hands. I have large hands. And so I start on violin. They're like, we're putting a viola. And then I immediately jumped immediately became first violist because this was viola.
That's what happened to her too. That's so funny. But I used to always say to her, it's so weird to read your music because it's not the melody.
That's the melody.
Right. And
she would say,
right. And she would say, Mom, and she says, I get that. She says, but this is such an important part, because without the viola, you don't hear all the other sounds in the same kind of way. And it's exactly what you're saying about the orchestra, which I think is really sort of apt to what's going on, in a lot of different places right now, where we're really trying to build some consensus, where that's been difficult, in recent times. Let me ask you this, are there things, what we've been talking about with the listeners up until now is really sort of, how folks have had bravery or how they've overcome adversity, because there's lots of different situations that, they'll find themselves in over the course of their career or their personal lives. But, can you reflect, is there a moment that stands out in your mind, where you had a particular triumph, when you had a difficult situation or some sort of adversity that you were up against? Some might say that the entire career of those of us who start out
Oh.
early in something is in adversity, but I don't know if there's a particular thing that pops into mind.
Well, every film that gets made is a miracle. It is truly a miracle. So many things need to align that when they do, you're like, how did this, you almost can't believe it, because so often you're putting together, you get the director and the cast, or the financing falls out, or then the cast drops, or the time, and then that, or the script's not right, or the location drop, whatever. There's so many things that have to align. And so I think every movie is a miracle. I truly do. Everything, the bringing all the right people together, then not just the getting it made, then if it actually is a good movie that people enjoy, that's a whole other miracle. The music, there's so many disparate pieces that come together, and that's part of the magic, is to see how each person and each craft makes such a big contribution. So I guess people now associate me more than any other movie with the Joy Luck Club. And that one was a super miracle because it just defied every rule. I mean, the first being there are virtually no white people in it. Okay, that just didn't happen back then. And especially an all Asian cast. There were some Black movies that were being made at the time, but virtually none with an all Asian cast, except a few indie movies like Wayne Wang did, Chan is Missing, and there were a few others here and there that were great. But this was a studio movie, so I think it was, except for also Flower Drum Song, which I just working on doing a contemporary version of, and that came out in the early 60s. The play was in the late 50s, so that was also incredible. So you'd see these outliers. So there's that, and then 30 years passed, whatever. And then it was actually very interesting. It was about 30 years between Flower Drum Song and Joy Luck Club, and then another 25 between Joy Luck Club and Crazy Rich Asians. So there are these landmarks. You just wait decades and decades. But to hear that people still remember and say that it changed their lives is incredibly gratifying. But besides it being all Asian cast, it had a lot of Mandarin Chinese in it. It had a lot of flashbacks. That's supposed to be a no-no at the time. The subtitles were a no-no. Everything was a no-no. Like somehow no-no became yes, yes. I don't know how. It just was it was one person, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and that person who greenlights movies, and I can talk for half an hour just about that, because so far no Asians and no people of color. It's pretty much all white men who write those checks, have green light power. But it took that one, Jeffrey Katzenberg, to greenlight the Joy Luck Club. I give him all the credit. He supported the making of the movie, and and I think really benefited from this whole studio benefited from it. But it's risky because it doesn't, if and what's happening today is there's in my opinion, over-reliance on algorithms, because algorithms can be helpful if you just want the information of what has done well in the past, but it should not be prescriptive, because the whole point is that we as a human species want change. We are always changing. We want something fresh. We may not want a radical change. Like I've actually had to analyze creativity for someone once. And it's usually a combination of something that's familiar and something that's different. So you don't want people to feel totally out of body with watching something so different that they don't have any reference points. But if it's something that feels somewhat familiar, but then has twists and surprises that keeps them curious, you want to just keep going, like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, I think David Chang of Momofuku had one of the best descriptions. He says when he has a recipe that is really successful, the first utterance from the person eating is like, oh, it's like a familiar thing, but then they're like, oh, it's like they keep eating going, this is delicious, but it's a little different. What is it that makes it different? How is it? Blah, 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 blah. So I think that's what people are always looking for. Like, you're not out of your comfort zone entirely, but you're not so comfortable that you're just kind of get very complacent. Like, you want to stay stimulated,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that thought. You know, one of the things, Janet, is I know that you've been very focused about throughout your career about, you know, looking at works and film and being inclusive and having inclusion, being sensitive to marginalized communities. I know some of that stuff you've done through your production work, but you know, how do you weave that in? Because, you know, as you were saying, it's just not all commercial. It's not easily translatable, you know, but they're important things. I'm sure there are things that you see and that you feel very deeply, that the rest of us are experiencing, that you're trying to deal with, all the way to, you know, and this comes from me, this is my question, all the way to, you know, as you know, I've long been fighting for civil rights, you know, here in this country for all, but one of the things is always that it's hard to change someone's image of another person. And if you really want to lessen and eradicate some of like hate crimes and things like that, they need to understand who that person is. And I've always said the easiest way to do that is to do it in the media. So what is happening right now and that you and others have created, I cannot tell you from the legal side of it, how joyful we are and how that's really allowed us to do some other kinds of work. But, you know, how does that work?
Hearing that, I'm not sure how it's affected you, but I love hearing it. What's an example if you make? I hadn't
You
really
know, I
thought
think,
about
well, I mean, I
the legal
think that
community is affected.
yeah, I mean, let's use a perfect example of Crazy Rich Asians, right? And so all of a sudden, there's this image of not just the immigrant, right? Of not just the nerdy
Got
kid,
it.
right? There's a whole different kind of image, which
Yeah.
lets people's minds see and extend much more broadly as to what being, you know, Asian American is. And then that lets us fit some of our work into that dialogue because people are seeing the community in a much broader way. Some of the work that you're doing, that I know you were instrumental and helped start, you know, Gold House, right? But some of the work that Gold House is doing, and you know, we have some of the folks who've been involved in that, you know, on another podcast, but some of the things that they've been doing in opportunities, but putting more Asians on the screen, right?
Yes.
So it's
Okay,
not
I
just
get it. Of course. Yeah.
that, right? It's helping us. And so
Good.
talk about some of that work.
Well, it's what I said from the very beginning. I know it does change people's perceptions, and it's again, it's what continues to motivate me. You know, and it's not quantifiable. So some people may not recognize that it does. It's soft power, we call it, right? So it's frustrating sometimes because there could be just dismissal of, you know, the impact that a piece of work has. But I think when those of us who work in creative fields recognize the power of it, we have to, you know, it's a weird combination of expressing one's own. It's like when I choose what I want to work on or not, it has to resonate with me first, right? That's the only thing that's going to keep me going. But I also have to believe it will resonate, therefore, with others. So it's a funny process because it's not like, again, it's not quantifiable. It's not like we're going to go out and figure out what everybody wants and we're going to make that. I don't think that works very well. I think it has to resonate personally. And so we have to feel it. We have to feel like, oh, this is something that moves me. And therefore, I think it will move others. And when I was talking about that, the combination of familiar and refreshing, I think it's been so interesting to watch. For instance, Crazy Rich Asians took a very standard genre of a rom-com, which hadn't been popular for a while, but it cast Asians. That was the surprising part. And it took us to Singapore, right? And that made all the difference. So that was the part, and people could learn about cultures. Most people are curious. Most people want to learn something. You know, I'm reveling in the fact that both Barbie and Oppenheimer are very smart films. And what I should probably not say anymore, because again, I have to remain very neutral about any film that's nominated. I'm just talking about the phenomenon of these two films being so unique in their own right. And people are clamoring for films like this, and that makes me very happy. So it's been a very weird time because we have such good news and then such not good news, and it's hard to reconcile it all, and nobody really knows where it's going and how long this will last. But the point is that there's there's something about people coming together, and I think people crave that experience. Taylor Swift is in town, as you know, and it's that same. What you hadn't heard, right? So people love gathering. They love being in that environment and having this shared experience again. And I think that's what we're seeing these days at the theater, which makes me super happy.
Well, it's funny you said that because I went on Friday to Taylor Swift, and my
Of
three
course
daughters,
you did, Deb. Who did you go with?
I went with my three daughters, and I went, in all pink, because they told me I had to get into the moment. But right before we walked into SoFi Stadium, my middle daughter turned around to me and she put her arms on my shoulders and she said, she's 9 inches taller than I am, but she said, "Mommy, do you understand that you're about to experience something?" And I was like, "What?" She said, "This is a phenomenon. You're about to experience something. So no iPhone, no talking." She says, "I just want you to be in the moment and experience it." It was really sweet because it really did sort of flip a mental switch for me. And when I got inside, I thought, she's 1,000% correct. But I do feel that energy of people. I think maybe it might be a post-COVID thing, but I also think some of the stuff that's going on in the entertainment, and I'm an outsider, right? But some of the stuff that's going on in the entertainment business, a lot of it has to do with the nature of things, that there's so many platforms now, there's so many places where you can get content, and it's been like all over the place. I jokingly tell my children that when I first watched TV, there were 3 stations and that there were antenna ears in order to get the signal, right? And so the idea that they can get whatever they want, whenever they want, is such a joy and luxury. But I think there's some of that trying to figure itself and align itself.
Completely. I mean, some would say there's an oversaturation of content, and so it's really hard, and I noticed it when it happened in the music industry, when suddenly you could get any song from anyone at any time. It was the days of like getting that special record or then the CD or whatever, where you had to actually, there was a process to actually play it other than just like hitting a button on your phone. And this is what the newer generations or this is the world they're coming into, and they're going to have to adapt. And, I see some counter activity, like people going to bookstores or wanting something intimate, or, I have to believe, I'm generally an optimist about the human condition, and I feel like we're always making corrections. So, and, the whole topic of AI will inevitably be entering a lot of people's conversations, and we don't know, but I remain curious. I remain open and I remain curious. It's really hard for me to land on a hard point of view because I think so much is uncertain, and we all have to do what we believe is right in the moment and have our best intentions.
Yeah. Well, one quick question, because some of us, went and saw Joyride. And as I understand it, it was actually a more daring name. And somebody told me that it had some play off of the Joy Luck Club.
It did. It was Joy Club. It was that was the working title, Joy Club. I can't say that dirty 4-letter word, but it was. I remember Adele said, "I just have to ask you, what do you think?" And I was like, sounds okay to me. And then actually there were some people in the mix from the original movie, I don't need to mention names, who didn't like the idea. And then after they saw the movie, they're like, "Oh, what we're thinking." The point is, it probably would have never gotten approved. So it's more just a theoretical thing, but that's what they were referring to. And at the Gold House Gala earlier, this year or last year? Now I've lost track of time. When was it? Last year. Yeah, this year or last year, Gold House Gala. Anyway, it was so lovely because the cast of Joyride presented whatever legacy award to the cast of Joy Luck Club. And it was just so nice to gather these two groups of incredible actors. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I have to tell you that it was a joy to see the Academy, I mean, the Oscars this year with you on the stage and in such prominence, but then, you know, all of the victories, including the end with, you know, everything everywhere all at once. And so, and
Pretty historic, wasn't it?
it was really amazing. And so my last question to you is, you know, sort of like, you know, that's been wonderful. So, you know, the kinds of things that, you know, you're thinking of aside from, you know, aside from the everyday work of what it is that you're doing, which I know is busy. But, you know, as you're listening to these diverse voices and trying to create, you know, creative projects, you know, what does that look like going forward for you?
It looks like a lot of parceling of time to do things. I've had to learn. It's so funny. I was just at this other big dinner last night with a lot of Asian women founders and people working in the industry, whatever. And it was all about wellness. Like it was another gold women's thing, and it was all about wellness. I was definitely the oldest person there because I could really sympathize with these women in their 40s who have young children at home, who are maybe parents who are not well, then their big careers. And I remember that feeling of like, no matter what you're doing there, you feel guilty for not doing something. You're not taking enough time for yourself. You're not taking enough time for you. And fortunately, I've kind of moved past that. And there's a certain calm that comes when you're, first of all, okay with not pleasing every single person. You're okay. You just let things go more easily. Hopefully you feel this in your life too. And it's just it's very interesting. Did I go off topic? Because now I forgot what the question was, but what was the question?
Sort of where are we going from?
So a lot of people said, oh my God, how did you do this job? And blah, blah, blah. It's definitely extremely time consuming. There's 18 branches, 9 committees. I basically have to sit in every one of those meetings. And there's a whole bunch of other things. You know, we have governor's awards, we have in memoriam, we have so many. So it is a lot of time, but at no point, and this is why I don't feel stressed or psychically worn down, at no point did I ever feel like I couldn't be myself. Like I felt like I don't have to conform. We have a wonderful CEO, Bill Kramer, who's also very upbeat, and we have a lot of the same instincts. So I don't feel like my time is wasted, and I don't feel like I have to be someone other than myself. And I think those are the two big stressors. Like I know people who work for large corporations who just feel like they can't truly be themselves. There's a party line or whatever, it was just not for me, because one thing that I think contributes to my well-being is that I don't really have to answer to a person. I don't have this thing above my head. It's like, oh, I bow to that thing, that company, mission, or, the organization is of course, something that we want to uphold, but it so aligns with what my beliefs are anyway. So it's no conflict. And and then I do make time. I insist on making time for my other projects. It looks like one of them is going. I can't say too much about it, but unfortunately does not require, it's actually a documentary with some amazing filmmakers that you've heard of, but I can't talk about it. And most of my work is done until post-production. I'm not part of the production intensely per se. So it's struggling. It's sort of like, did you feel this way before you had kids? Or maybe when you contemplate your second and third, it's like, how am I going to fit a kid into my schedule? And it just works out. Like it doesn't seem like it will when you're thinking about it in the abstract, it just works out. So I just take it day at a time. Some days are rougher than others. There's a lot of travel involved, and but it just works out somehow.
Well, we want to thank you on behalf of the community for everything that you're doing. It was great to see you. And I hope to see you, off camera sometime soon, but really appreciate your giving your time and your thoughts.
Thank you. Good luck and hello and goodbye to all the NAPABA members.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.